Welcome back to Omni Power, the channel that decodes the hidden forces shaping global power, wealth, and your future. Right now, the entire world is watching China's military expansion, its high-tech industry, and its fierce trade wars with the West. Mainstream media tells you to fear a rising superpower, but they're looking in the wrong direction. The single greatest threat to China's future dominance isn't an American economic blockade, and it isn't a foreign military alliance. It is a silent, unstoppable killer from within, an empty cradle. Today, we expose the absolute danger of China's demographic collapse, a crisis so severe it could permanently crush Beijing's superpower dreams before this decade ends. If you want to understand how a nation of 4 billion people can suddenly run out of humans, let us dive deep into the numbers, the history, and the harsh realities of a shrinking giant. The data in 2026 is undeniable. China is aging faster than any civilization in human history. To put this into perspective, think of a massive economic engine that has run at full speed for 40 years, suddenly running completely out of fuel. The fuel of the Chinese economic miracle was never just factories or capital. It was an endless supply of young, cheap, disciplined labor. Now that fuel is gone. Can a nation lead the world when its workforce is vanishing into thin air? Can a country maintain global dominance when its retirement funds are drying up and its own youth are actively choosing to drop out of society? This isn't a problem for the distant future. The crisis is happening right now. China is trapped in a demographic death spiral, and the window for it to claim uncontested global hegemony may have already slammed shut. When we look back at the history of global superpowers, every single one of them relied on demographic strength. The Roman Empire, the British Empire, and the rise of the United States were all backed by growing, vibrant, and expanding populations. A large population provides 3 critical pillars for state power: an abundant workforce to drive economic output, a massive tax base to fund state ambitions, and a deep pool of human capital to innovate and, if necessary, defend the nation. China understood this perfectly in the late 20th century. Its rise was built on a demographic wave that seemed unstoppable. But today, that wave is crashing against the shore of structural reality. The sheer speed of China's population aging has caught the world, and perhaps even Beijing itself, by surprise. It took Western nations over a century to shift from vibrant, youthful societies into graying ones. China is undergoing this massive transformation in just a few decades, leaving its social, economic, and political systems completely unprepared for the shock. The danger of this collapse is found in its absolute permanency. Economic recessions can be fixed with monetary policy, housing bubbles can be popped and cleaned up, and trade routes can be rerouted. But demographic collapse cannot be reversed with the stroke of a pen. Once a generation decides not to have children, that gap in the workforce remains empty for decades. The babies not born today represent the missing workers, missing taxpayers, and missing consumers of tomorrow. This is the structural reality that threatens to permanently derail China's march toward global supremacy. For decades, China reaped the benefits of what economists call a demographic dividend. In simple terms, it means China had a massive population of working-age people and very few children or elderly people to take care of. This perfect ratio allowed the country to invest every single yuan into building infrastructure, expanding cities, and dominance in global trade. It was the greatest industrial expansion in modern history. However, recent census data has confirmed a terrifying reality: the fastest population decline in modern human history. The population pyramid has completely inverted. Birth rates have plummeted to roughly 792 million, levels unseen since the Chinese Civil War era. Deaths are now significantly outnumbering births. Because the workforce is shrinking while the number of retirees explodes, China's skyrocketing national GDP growth has hit a wall of stagnation. The automatic growth machine has broken down. To understand why this demographic dividend was so powerful, we must look at the mechanics of economic growth. Growth is driven by two primary factors: the number of inputs, meaning capital and labor, and the efficiency of those inputs, known as productivity. During its boom years, China had an almost infinite supply of labor inputs. Millions of young people moved from rural villages to coastal cities every year, willing to work long hours for low wages. This massive labor migration kept manufacturing costs incredibly low, making China the undisputed hub of global trade. But today, this process has completely reversed. The rural labor pool has been drained, and the existing urban workforce is aging rapidly. Instead of adding millions of productive new workers to the economy every year, China is now losing millions of workers annually. This means that simply to keep GDP growth steady, individual productivity must rise at a pace fast enough to offset the loss of human hands. The inversion of the population pyramid creates a massive structural drag on the entire economy. A top-heavy society, where a small number of young workers must support a vast number of retirees, is inherently less dynamic. Retirees consume less, save more, and require significant public resources for healthcare and pensions. Young workers, on the other hand, drive innovation, start new businesses, and purchase homes and consumer goods. As the balance shifts decisively toward the elderly, the economic energy of the nation naturally begins to fade, leading to the structural stagnation we observe today. China built its reputation as the undisputed factory of the world. If you wanted anything manufactured cheaply and at scale, you went to China. Today, those massive manufacturing hubs are facing severe, permanent labor shortages. Beijing's massive bet on artificial intelligence, AI, and automation has not saved them. While advanced robots can weld cars and package electronics, they cannot replace the massive domestic consumer base or the flexible human capital needed to run a complex economy. Even worse, China is facing a bizarre, dangerous paradox: skyrocketing youth unemployment alongside factory labor shortages. Millions of young Chinese graduates are shunning blue-collar manufacturing roles. They have degrees, but the high-paying white-collar jobs they want do not exist. As the supply of factory workers dries up, industrial wages are skyrocketing. This destroys China's main competitive advantage: cheap manufacturing. Multinational corporations are reading the writing on the wall. Capital is fleeing. Global firms are rapidly relocating their factories to demographically young, dynamic nations like India, Vietnam, and Southeast Asia. The reality on the ground in manufacturing hubs like Dongguan and Shenzhen is fundamentally changing. Industrial parks that once hummed with the activity of hundreds of thousands of young migrants are now seeing factory gates closed and dormitories sitting empty. Factory managers report that even when they offer significantly higher wages, sign-on bonuses, and improved living conditions, they simply cannot attract enough young workers to man the assembly lines. This is not a temporary shift in the labor market. It is a structural shortage of human beings. This shortage has triggered a forced march toward automation. China has become the world's largest buyer of industrial robotics, installing hundreds of thousands of automated systems across its manufacturing sectors. However, automation has sharp economic limits. Robots are highly efficient at repetitive, predictable tasks, but they lack the flexibility to quickly pivot to new product designs or handle highly customized manufacturing processes. Furthermore, the capital expenditure required to automate a factory is immense, squeezing the profit margins of small and medium-sized enterprises that form the backbone of the Chinese supply chain. The youth unemployment crisis adds a layer of social volatility to this economic challenge. For decades, the Chinese educational system pushed families to invest everything into their children's university education, promising that a degree would guarantee a comfortable, white-collar lifestyle. Now, millions of graduates enter the job market each year only to find a severe shortage of professional, high-paying corporate roles. Refusing to take the blue-collar factory jobs they feel overqualified for, many graduates remain unemployed or underemployed. This mismatch between skills, expectations, and available jobs creates a highly frustrated educated class, while the factories that drive the nation's export wealth continue to starve for labor. The most explosive domestic threat to the ruling party's control is the looming collapse of China's provincial pension funds. By 2035, the number of elderly citizens in China will hit 400 million. That is more than the entire population of the United States. This creates an unbearable crisis at both the macro and family levels. Because of past state policies, most young adults in China today are only children. When they marry another only child, that single young couple is suddenly financially responsible for 4 grandparents, 2 parents, and their own children. The financial and emotional pressure of this 4-2-1 burden is crushing the young generation. At the macro level, local governments are running out of money to fund these massive pension systems. To keep hundreds of millions of retirees alive, Beijing is forced to redirect billions of dollars into elderly health care and Social Security. This is money that should be invested in high-tech R&D, semiconductor development, and aerospace engineering. The aging crisis is literally eating the seed money for China's future. The fiscal architecture of China's pension system makes this problem incredibly difficult to solve. The system is highly fragmented, with individual provinces managing their own pools of capital. Wealthy, industrialized coastal provinces like Guangdong have historically enjoyed pension surpluses due to their influx of young migrant workers. However, interior and Rust Belt provinces like Heilongjiang have been running deep pension deficits for years, as their young people have left, leaving behind an aging, retired population. To prevent defaults, the central government has to implement massive fiscal transfer mechanisms, taking wealth from productive regions to subsidize the retirement of aging provinces. This redistribution acts as a heavy tax on the most dynamic parts of the economy. Furthermore, as the national population ages as a whole, even the wealthy provinces are seeing their surpluses shrink. The financial burden is expanding at a rate that threatens to overwhelm the state treasury, forcing difficult choices between funding social stability or investing in geopolitical power. The diversion of capital from cutting-edge technological development to elderly care has profound long-term strategic consequences. To win the geopolitical competition of the 21st century, China must achieve self-sufficiency in foundational technologies like advanced lithography, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence. These industries require immense, sustained capital investments with long horizons before seeing a return. When a state is forced to prioritize immediate, non-productive expenditures like geriatric medicine and basic retirement stipends, its ability to sustain massive, state-directed technology funds is fundamentally compromised. The pension crisis is a direct tax on China's future innovative capacity. How did China get here? It was a self-inflicted wound. In 1979, fearing overpopulation, the government introduced the brutal one-child policy. It achieved its goal too well, permanently breaking the country's demographic structure. When Beijing finally realized the danger and rushed out the 3-child policy in 2021, followed by cash subsidies for newborns, it was met with total silence. The baby boom never happened. Why? Because the cost of urban living, real estate, and education in modern China is simply too high. Instead of having babies, China's youth launched the lying flat, Tang Ping, and let it rot social movements. Exhausted by brutal 12-hour workdays and intense competition, millions of young people are choosing to opt out of the system. They refuse to buy homes, refuse to marry, and refuse to have children. In the West, nations fight population decline through immigration. But China has one of the most restrictive immigration stances on Earth, making it virtually impossible for foreigners to become citizens. Beijing desperately needs millions of young people, but its own political and cultural system completely blocks the only emergency exit available. The one-child policy was perhaps the most radical piece of social engineering ever executed by a modern state. For over 3 decades, it fundamentally altered the traditional Chinese family structure, which for millennia had relied on large kinship networks to provide mutual support and economic security. By shrinking the family tree down to a single line, the policy removed the natural safety nets that built local resilience. It also created a severe gender imbalance, as a cultural preference for male heirs led to millions of missing girls, leaving an entire generation of young men with little prospect of finding a partner and forming a traditional family. When the state lifted the restrictions, transitioning first to a two-child policy and then to a three-child model, planners expected a natural rebound in fertility. What they failed to understand was that the economic incentives of modern, urbanized China run directly counter to family formation. In cities like Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Beijing, the cost of housing relative to income is among the highest in the world. A young couple looking to buy a modest apartment to start a family faces decades of crippling mortgage debt. This economic reality has driven a profound psychological shift among the younger generation. The lying flat movement is more than just a social media trend. It is a rational, defensive reaction to an economic landscape that demands maximum effort for diminishing returns. Young adults look at the lives of their parents, who sacrificed everything for economic survival, and then look at the grueling 996 corporate schedule. They realize that even if they work themselves to exhaustion, they may never afford a home or provide their children with the elite education required to compete. By choosing to lie flat, they are rejecting the traditional markers of success, and the most significant casualty of this quiet rebellion is the national birth rate. The danger of this demographic collapse extends far beyond China's borders. It completely rewires global geopolitics. For decades, China's ultimate leverage over Western corporations and governments was its massive domestic consumer market. Foreign companies tolerated intellectual property theft and political pressure just to get access to one, for billion buyers. But as the population shrinks and ages, that market leverage disappears. Older populations spend less and save more. As China's domestic market weakens, foreign nations will find it much easier to economically decouple from Beijing. This brings us to the ultimate economic trap. China is getting old before it gets rich. When the US, Japan, and Western Europe aged, they were already wealthy nations with massive per capita GDPs and advanced social safety nets. China is graying while still trapped as a middle-income country. This directly damages its military ambitions. A government forced to spend its national wealth on elder care and basic medical bills cannot sustain a multi-trillion-dollar military expansion, build massive blue water navies, or fund global infrastructure projects like the Belt and Road Initiative. The gray rhino is starving the dragon's military machine. The geopolitical weight of a nation is intimately tied to the size and attractiveness of its domestic market. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, Beijing used access to its consumer base as a highly effective diplomatic carrot and stick. If a foreign government took a political stance that displeased Beijing, access to the Chinese market for that country's key exports would suddenly be restricted. Multinationals actively lobbied their own home governments to maintain smooth relations with China to protect their corporate revenues. As the domestic market contracts due to population decline, this leverage naturally decays. An aging population changes the composition of national demand. Spending shifts away from consumer electronics, automobiles, and luxury goods toward healthcare, long-term care, and basic necessities. Foreign corporations will see the growth potential of the Chinese market fade, diminishing the economic cost of decoupling. This reduces the geopolitical vulnerability of Western economies, allowing them to take firmer positions on trade, human rights, and regional security without fearing immediate, catastrophic economic retaliation. Furthermore, the strategic challenge of getting old before getting rich creates an unyielding fiscal boundary for China's global ambitions. The country's leadership has long sought to project power far beyond its immediate shores, investing heavily in a modern blue water navy, long-range missile systems, and space capabilities. It has also used the Belt and Road Initiative to extend its financial and political influence across Central Asia, Africa, and Europe through massive infrastructure loans. All of these external projects require a substantial and growing domestic economic surplus to fund them. When that surplus is eaten away by the non-negotiable internal costs of an aging society, the state is forced to pull back from its global commitments. The People's Liberation Army will find itself competing for resources against the Ministry of Civil Affairs. A nation struggling to fund basic elder care at home will face immense internal political pressure if it continues to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on ports in the Indian Ocean or satellites in orbit. The demographic crisis forces a strategic contraction, limiting Beijing's ability to sustain a global challenge to the existing international order. The Chinese Communist Party is now locked in a desperate, hyper-accelerated race against time. They cannot change the demographic data. The workers of the next 20 years have already not been born. Their only hope is to transition completely to a high-productivity economic model powered by extreme automation, AI, and advanced robotics before the financial system implodes under the weight of its dependency ratio. This technological pivot is a monumental gamble. Beijing is attempting to replace human labor with algorithmic and mechanical efficiency at a scale never before attempted in human history. They are pouring capital into state-directed technological ecosystems, hoping to create fully automated supply chains that can manufacture goods, manage logistics, and generate economic value with minimal human intervention. If they succeed, they will establish a new model of economic power, one where national strength is decoupled from population size. However, the structural gravity of a demographic collapse is incredibly hard to escape. Technology can boost industrial efficiency, but it cannot replace the organic demand generated by a young, optimistic, and expanding population. Robots do not buy apartments, they do not sign up for insurance policies, and they do not create the vibrant consumer cultures that drive modern service economies. An automated factory can produce millions of goods, but if there is no young domestic population to purchase them, and if foreign markets are decoupling, those goods will find no home. Ultimately, the graying dragon stands at a historic crossroads. The era of exponential, labor-driven Chinese growth is over. The coming decades will not be defined by China's inevitable rise to global hegemony, but rather by its desperate struggle to manage its own internal decline. Whether the state can successfully navigate this demographic storm through technological innovation, or whether it will succumb to the immense social and financial pressures of an aging society, will be the defining geopolitical story of the 21st century. The ultimate fate of this graying giant leaves the entire global balance of power hanging in a state of absolute suspense. History has taught us that when a massive, highly militarized superpower begins to realize its window of maximum opportunity is closing, its behavior becomes deeply unpredictable. A nation with a declining future can either choose to gracefully manage its retreat, or it can attempt to strike out aggressively, resolving its regional and historical ambitions before its structural strength permanently fades away. This leaves the global community staring down a paradox that will shape all of our lives. If Beijing manages to achieve total technological self-sufficiency, replacing hundreds of millions of missing workers with an omnipresent army of advanced algorithms and robotic automation, they will rewrite the laws of global economics forever. They will prove that a superpower can survive and even thrive with an empty cradle. But if the heavy gravity of local debts, generational fatigue, and a vanishing tax base drags the economic machine down first, the dragon's fire may be extinguished by the silent chill of its own empty nurseries. What do you think? Can advanced automation, AI, and robotics truly replace the irreplaceable energy of a young generation? Or are we witnessing the final chapter of China's quest for world dominance? If the window for China to overtake the West is closing, does that make Beijing a more peaceful neighbor or a far more dangerous, desperate actor on the world stage? Let us know your detailed thoughts, theories, and analysis in the comments below. We read every single insight you share. If you found this deep dive valuable, give this video a thumbs up, share it with anyone who wants to see past the mainstream headlines, and make sure to subscribe to Omni Power to stay ahead of the hidden forces breaking and reshaping our world. Thank you for listening to this briefing, and we will see you in the next critical update.